Mike Budenholzer in Chicago already with the Phoenix Suns front office, scouting players ahead of the NBA draft at the Combine in Chicago. On today's episode of Locked On Suns, a deep dive on how Coach Bud fits what the Suns are right now and what they could be as the offseason rolls on. Let's go.
You are Locked On Suns, your daily Phoenix Suns podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We are back. This is Locked On Phoenix Suns. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Brendon Kleen, a credentialed media member covering the Suns for the past 7 seasons and the host of the Just Basketball Show wherever you get your podcast. Thank you so much for making Locked On Suns your first listen to kick off your Thursday. The offseason rolls on. More news, more analysis to get to. Wherever you're finding the show, hit follow or subscribe. We're free and available everywhere, including YouTube. Hit that button, get a new episode in your feed every single Monday through Friday. Get locked onto the Phoenix Suns every day throughout the offseason and beyond. Become an everydayer. We're here for you. Thousands of people are here with you. I'm here for you. They're here with you. Let's have some fun as the Suns offseason continues. Joining us as he does to help us do that every single week is Stephen PridGeon. He is a writer over at PHNXCHGO. Bright Side of the Sun, everywhere. He's everywhere, and he's here once a week with us. So let's dive into Mike Budenholzer, Stephen, and we're going to break this down into 3 categories. Basically, big picture philosophy, nitty-gritty scheme stuff, and then personnel, both what he's had to work with personnel-wise in Atlanta, in Milwaukee, maybe even San Antonio if we want to go back that far, and, of course, how that translates over to this Suns roster as the offseason kicks off and gives them an opportunity to reshape it. But going big picture first, I want to start here because I think there's this reputation around Bud and around some coaches like him that tend to maximize what they have, and I think especially with that Hawks team, I think they were punching above their weight just based on reputation and everything, Stephen, and they kind of get this reputation of, you know, okay, that's like a scheme guy, that's cute, better than the sum of its parts, whatever, but then you marry that with this Bucks team where he gets the best player in the NBA, an MVP on his team, and then it's like, all right, you know, that's a little different than some champions, but it looks more like what we're used to. Now he's going to have this big 3. When you think about how his teams have played and what has mattered to Bud and what his teams have done consistently, Stephen, what do you feel like will change with this type of a roster where it's 3 superstars and, you know, not a lot of depth and a very different situation than he's had before?
I think the biggest thing that kind of stands out to me, well, I guess it would be twofold. The first of which being the center group and needing a piece that can do things in a versatile manner on demand to the requisite level that the playoffs will have expectation-wise for said player. Now, I'm very curious how he assesses use of Nurkic, if he feels that Nurkic can execute to the extent that he'll need for his defensive philosophies to be upheld and for his principles to be upheld. I'm also very curious, in addition to that, to see what his defense looks like in terms of assessing what's available, what can be attained, and who's already on roster to facilitate to that role that Giannis Antetokounmpo was for everything that he did on defense with the Milwaukee Bucks, obviously when they won the 2021 chip against the Phoenix Suns. I think those 2 key pieces in terms of the front court defensively are huge in everything he desires to do, whether that be just solely looking at rebounding and playing in drop coverage from that center position or being versatile to do multiple things from that position next to the center in the front court. And if he thinks Kevin Durant can do a lot of those things that he's going to desire. That's kind of it at the surface level for me before anything else. I'm curious where your thoughts are with that.
Yeah, I think the defense is a great example of it. I guess just my thing is like, he does need talent to get the most out of how he wants to play. That's not, I guess, every coach you could say that of, right? But I just think of, honestly, some comparisons. I went back and watched Game 3 of the 2021 finals before this. So I kind of tortured myself, both in, just reminiscing on what used to be here, but also, of course, they lost that game. So the Suns lost that game. But kind of watching that, I'm like, okay, there's certain things that he's going to do as a coach that are floor raising, right? And some of the defensive things you mentioned there in terms of just, playing, I don't want to say playing the numbers like he's some kind of analytics first guy, but forcing the right types of shots defensively, playing fast, et cetera, et cetera. But because of that, Monty Williams kind of was along those same lines. He raised the floor of what the Suns were going to do. Then he gets Chris Paul and Jay Crowder and some development out of the young guys. And now, okay, we're really rolling. Then he goes to Detroit. It's very different. I kind of think you look back to those Atlanta times with Bud, and I think some of that floor raising was just enough in the era he was playing in a weak Eastern Conference and everything else to basically take him from, late 2000s ball to kind of seeing the future ball. And all of a sudden, that was enough to make them a contender. And I don't want to take away from what those players were able to do, but come playoff time, LeBron James was able to beat them consistently. You get to Milwaukee, and I just look at the way they played, and it's a lot of, okay, yes, the defense, the scheme is gonna get you to a certain point, but he's not what he is without Brook Lopez executing and taking away the paint with his mobility, with his size, with his length, with his IQ. Drew Holiday blowing things up at the point of attack to allow that backline coverage to be what it was. Giannis to switch a lot and be that secondary rim protector. And then on the offensive end, I have some thoughts on what the offense will look like and some things we could see more of, but at the end of the day, it helps to have bucket getters, the way that Middleton was a bucket getter, the way that Holiday could be a microwave guy from three-point land especially, and then Giannis just being able to drive to the basket, post up, and do all that type of stuff. So I think we should get out of he's a scheme coach too much and really be thinking about how does the talent map. And I think, you starting there with the defense is exactly along the same wavelength of what I'm thinking, to be honest with you. And it's not going to be 1-to-1. And I think that's kind of the tricky and fun part to think about.
Yeah. And I kind of take things a little step further, looking at it through the lens of defense, because I do feel that when you have the $120 million spent on the top three players that you don't look for your offense to be something that a coach is going to have to solve. Like, yes, you want organization. Yes, you want identity. Yes, you want those little things within all of that chemistry and continuity wise to be upheld. But you feel like most of the sorting out that you're going to have to do is going to come on the defensive side of the ball. You look at those Atlanta Hawk teams. Those teams were extremely good on the offensive side of the floor. That I think he was the coach when they had 3 or 4 All-Stars in the mid-2000s, from Jeff Teague and Kyle Korver, Paul Millsap, Al Horford. Those teams are tough, but you look at the intricacies within it, the context of the team, how those pieces fit, how they upheld scheme. Looking at that team and that rendition in that era of NBA basketball, Jeff Teague at his prime was a fairly solid defender. He wasn't shut down, but he was fairly solid. He could navigate screens. He could get his hands on deflections, get steals, steer the wheel at the point of attack and defense. And guess what? When he wasn't on the floor, who was on the floor was Dennis Schroeder. And this is as young as it gets in the league, Dennis Schroeder. So his first step, his lateral quickness, the hand and eye coordination and quickness that comes with that, the screen navigation galore. He was able to have above average to elite level screen navigation from the point of attack at the surface level of everything else that he decided to want to do defensively. Then you look at the layers after that, you got Paul Millsap and Al Horford, two pieces that are bigger, have wingspan, they have athletic mobility, they can switch, they can play up at the level of the screen, they can do a ton of different things that you were going to need to do scheme-wise to execute and be successful with that team. And then obviously you look at Milwaukee, a lot more drop coverage with Brook Lopez, but Giannis Antetokounmpo is a wrecking ball on defense, doing quite literally everything at the point of attack sometimes guarding screeners, flipping matchups.
Man, doesn't it jump out watching back that how much more versatile and impactful he used to be on that end? And I don't even think he's bad now, but I was watching that finals game. I'm like, this is a different guy. He was he was everywhere. It was doing everything, like you're saying. I mean, that helps for sure.
Yeah, and having that wrench that can guard guards initially on offense to flip matchups and make pick and rolls become switches, or just generally be able to guard an opposing big and be able to make that a switch. And then we saw, I think the play that comes to mind most, I can't remember what game it was. It was definitely in Milwaukee, where he gets a late switch with Chris Paul going to his right hand. Chris goes between his legs to his left, crosses back over to the right, creates space on the baseline, and then pulls up. Like, that's great. That's great space created from Chris Paul in the mid-range, one of the best mid-range shooters the game has seen. But Giannis doesn't concede much space. Chris is just able to get off his shot quicker than he's able to get up his contest, although there wasn't much space for that either. Like, I think that's the type of thing that when you're looking at front court pieces in today's NBA, you have to have a few pieces that are able to execute to that extent in waning moments. And clearly he had that with the Atlanta Hawks in stretches, and even more so with the Milwaukee Bucks with Giannis. So I'm just really curious how he's going to assess the roster and what he's going to identify as pieces that he feels they should be going after, whether it be free agency or via trades, to uphold the principles that he needs to be successful as a coach defensively.
Yeah, let's go to offense to start off the next segment, because I'm not sure fans are in agreement, and especially coming off such an ugly playoff loss, that the offense doesn't need a lot of hands-on work. And so I want to talk about what that could look like, and maybe how much is on the coach to really do coming up next. First, today's show brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience, the formula for winning championships, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. With eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Keeping the show rolling. All right, Stephen. So, offensive end of the court. We focus a little more on defense there, I think, to kick things off. And I would agree with you, big picture, that's, of course, the area that the Suns' personnel is not as suited to dominate. But I put up a tweet after after the regular season, before the playoffs, and that week between, or somewhere around there. Definitely not once we saw how bad it got in the postseason. But I said, I think people are underselling how much, how successful the Suns' offense was when I was seeing some of the chatter online and comment section on these videos, or Reddit or Twitter or whatever, just Suns fans talking. And I was like, hey, after Christmas, when Beal got back, or shortly after Christmas, they were the 7th best offense in the NBA the rest of the way, basically the full second half of the season. And as much as I think that's pretty good, and maybe was better than I think general perception might have indicated, I still heard a lot of people who were like, okay, 7th isn't good enough. This is a super team. This is a team that has 3 great offensive players. You got to you should be the best or close to it in the whole league if you're going to win a championship, because we know the defense will be a question. So I kind of come back to that talent idea and wondering what the give and take is going to be between the star players and the coach, because there's concepts that I think Bud will bring. I think the floor will be probably better spaced. I think the pace will be better. I think they will have some go-to pet actions that maybe are more beneficial than maybe what they were this past year. You can make a case. I don't know. But I think a lot of what we will see will still be, a lot of side pick and roll. That was a Bud staple. That was a, Kevin Young staple here. And we did see a lot of even Drew Holiday ISOs, frankly, if not Middleton and Giannis ISOs. So I guess I'm not sure it can get much better. And maybe that was part of what you were saying. But I do think there's a reasonable case to be made that, hey, being the 7th best offense isn't good enough. So there is a little bit of pressure for Bud to figure out some things to get them to an even higher level on that end of the court.
I think a lot of times fans can get caught up with numbers and rankings and all of that stuff. I feel like context is more important than the arbitrary numbers itself. So,
Sure.
for example, let's kind of look at it. If you're saying that the Suns finished this season 7th post All-Star break, and they married that 7th ranked offense, generally speaking, with a clutch offense that was top 5 or top 4.
Mm-hmm.
That number is going to feel a whole lot different if you're executing to the levels at which you're capable of when it matters most. And I feel like that's the part that was missing with this Suns team. How many games did they score 118, 120, 125, 130 points and lose this most recent season? Offense is not. It's just not the problem. I do think they can be more.
Let me put it. So here's the other part of it. I think would be that they were like a bottom 5 offense in the playoffs. Period.
Yes. And when I speak to context, that's what I'm getting to. So you're gonna talk about the regular season part being 7th, but also not marrying that with the elite level or even close to elite level offense. Then you take it to an even further extreme when it really matters most in the playoffs, and you see the same issues in the clutch and just generally being able to sustain multi-double-digit leads over the course of a series. That issue takes a higher precedent, and then you add to that the fact that they just generally weren't able to put the ball in the basket to the extent that they needed to be successful on the playoff stage as well. That's where you start seeing the issues. So I feel like the arbitrary number is not something to just bat an eye at, but I also feel like you have to apply the context with it, because I do feel like if they were 7th in offense and top 5 in clutch offense and then took that into the playoffs, we wouldn't be talking about Bud being a coach right now. We'd be talking about them being in the middle of a series with the Denver Nuggets.
Yeah. I think so. I mean, but also like maybe to defend the numbers a bit, like if they were a top 5 clutch offense, they probably would have been higher than 7th on offense, period, right? Because those moments where they collapsed, well, that ends up getting added in there, and that's part of maybe what I think those fans who push back on me were kind of maybe saying the same thing. So I think the other aspect here that I'm optimistic about with Bud is this team will play fast, and his teams, and I don't mean fast like Ja Morant. I mean fast like they're gonna, just again, watching back some of the footage, it's like the consistency with which they were even getting into some of that side pick and roll action or full on, drawn up set plays within 5, 6, 7 seconds of the shot clock. It was really impressive to me, even in the, grind of a finals game. That's good to see. But the Suns were middle of the pack in terms of transition offense. Part of that's because they didn't generate a lot of turnovers as a team, so they didn't get into those situations quite as often. But even if you want to just take it off of rebounds, they were low in frequency on that too, just a little more efficient when doing it. I think that's kind of random. Point being, I don't think that given the ball handlers and playmakers they have, I don't think that's good enough. And I think that's another thing that can go a long way toward just getting that ceiling as a scoring unit up a little bit. So when you just think about what Bud could bring, where this personnel could go on the offensive end a little more, what do you think is some of that low-hanging fruit, or what are you watching the evolution of most closely with the offense?
Yeah, I mentioned it last season because I felt like he was the prime candidate, by my personal opinion, to take this team where they desired to go. Now, obviously, the team thought otherwise, and they brought in Vogel instead of Budenholzer, who was fresh off of being terminated as the Milwaukee Bucks head coach. But now, kind of fast forwarding past everything we saw this season and seeing how things played out and whatnot, I still feel the same, as though when scouring the market, seeing what coaches would be deemed available, what coaches could be poached from an opposing team's coaching staff, I still feel like Bud is the best coach that's available to facilitate to the Phoenix Suns in particular. And I think the biggest thing for me is having experience with a team that has a 3-headed monster in terms of how they can operate on offense. Being similarly positioned, if you look at obviously the team with the Milwaukee Bucks when they won the chip, Jrue Holiday, not a traditional point guard, more of a combo guard, but assumed the position of lead guard for the team. Chris Middleton, not necessarily a 2, but also definitely not a 3, very much a tweener in that respect. And then obviously Giannis being a traditional, more traditional type of or a type of power forward rather, but just generally being able to add versatility playing the wing and doing things. Look at the Suns. They're aligned very similarly. Not a traditional point guard on the roster in terms of pieces you're going to have when it matters most, especially. Also, Bradley Beal can toggle between playing the 3 and playing the 2 at times, depending on who it is that's in that lineup with them, whether that's Grayson Allen, Eric Gordon, Royce O'Neal, et cetera, et cetera. And then obviously Kevin Durant for Giannis Antetokounmpo, it speaks for itself. That 3-headed monster, they were extremely organized when things matter most, like you said. Yes, they did sprinkle in isolations. Yes, they sprinkled in a side pick and roll and manipulated space and made it empty corner. All of that fun stuff. They were also able to be organized and keep their best 3 players consistently in action. And the type of stress that puts on the defense, it's not dissimilar to what we're seeing with the Denver Nuggets the last 2 seasons, with Jamal Murray, Nikola Jokic, and either Michael Porter Jr. floating around on the wings or Aaron Gordon manning one of those 2 dunker spots. And that organization gives a team an identity to play towards, and players know where their shots are going to come from in a lot more of a predictable manner. Makes them tougher to guard. It allows you to manipulate a defense in different ways, and it just generally keeps your team in a position to where they know what they're doing with more consistency.
Yeah, I think it'll go a long way. I think structure, rules, concepts that are just no ifs, ands, or buts, I guess. I think that is a lot of the time what they were lacking, and why, even if we can quibble and, talk about the context of the numbers and everything else, different portions of the season, whatever, I think that's why I felt good enough about their offense overall when they were plugged into some of that dribble handoff, side pick and roll attack with Nurkic involved heavily, and different guys screening, different guys handling, different guys spacing, and the unpredictability and matchup hunting they could do off of that. It was an identity. It was something they could go back to. It was something that they could manipulate. And I think no matter who's hot or who's playing any of those roles or what their matchup or opponent is, if they could have just stuck with that against Minnesota, I think we would have felt a lot differently. And why probably Frank Vogel doesn't have a job is because they didn't even have anything to cling on to. So I think Bud will go a long way there. One thing, a couple smaller odds and ends that we can hit on before we jump to the players' side and maybe what the roster should look like to fit what Bud wants to do better. One thing that he did get criticized for a bunch that I think, even as the younger, more progressive coaches or whatever you want to call them in the NBA have kind of taken the reins on, Stephen, is he didn't hit the offensive glass a lot. His teams were always reticent to do that in favor of getting back in transition. I think the best teams in the NBA these days tend to offensive rebound and prioritize that, at least with one guy, or where they're kind of placing players and all that stuff. He had people in the dunker spot. He was known for that, but they didn't really hit the glass. So it was more for the dump offs and everything else. And then post ups. I guess this would be on the other side of things. I think to add that wrinkle as an emphasis for Beal, Booker, Durant as one of the options that they can go to within some of the structures that we've been talking about, I think that would help. I don't think any of those guys outside of Durant early in the season really did that at all. And you don't want to make guys uncomfortable. Seeing all 3 of those players and Durant use that before. Holiday would have stopped for the Bucks. Obviously Giannis would. Middleton can do that. More of the high post area. The Hawks teams did that. Of course, the Spurs teams did that. So I could see that being another little weapon that the Suns look at that came to mind watching some of this back. But let's get to the roster. Are there translations even deeper than what we've already hit on of how Suns players can model after what has worked for Bud's teams? What do they not have that they need? What do they have that should be able to plug in? We'll get into all of that coming up next. First, today's show brought to you by BetterHelp. We all carry around different stressors, big and small. When we keep them bottled up, it can affect us negatively, and therapy can be a safe space to get those things off your chest and figure out how to work through whatever's weighing you down. BetterHelp is perfect because it is flexible, convenient, suited to your schedule. It can be right from your desk or your bed or wherever. And on top of that, it's somebody unbiased about your life. This is a place where you can say, hey, I have this going on. It doesn't have to be massive and scary and crazy. It can just be, I'm struggling with this and I want to talk about it to somebody who's not going to give me their opinion and, have maybe an involvement in that. And there you go. You can also get matched with a licensed therapist using their questionnaire on the front end, but then switch around. Find the person that's right for you. That's the benefit of going through some place like BetterHelp, is it is not to drive to this office and try that one and call this person. They do that all for you. All you have to do is basically make sure it feels comfortable. Get it off your chest with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA to get 10% off your first month. Try it out for yourself at BetterHelp.com. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA to get 10% off your first month. All right, let's close out the show. So, Stephen, I know it's reductive, overly simplistic to just say, well, that guy's going to do what that guy does. They're different players. They're different people. I get that. However, I can't help but feel like honestly, in a lot of ways, offense and defense, in terms of kind of the mindset that he played with, I would just be showing Bradley Beal a lot of Drew Holiday film over this offseason. I think that there's just a lot in terms of the way that he played defense, the chemistry he built up with the big man, the kind of floor general on the defensive end that he was for that team. All respect to Brook Lopez, but I think a lot of that stemmed from Holiday, his versatility defending up on bigger players. And then honestly, his offensive mindset, I know Holiday can get critiqued for it. He's a little erratic, but I kind of want more erratic from Bradley Beal, if I'm being honest. I want him to let it fly. I'm fine with a 6 of 14 night in the first half, even if it isn't the most efficient. I'm fine with a 15 of 32 if he's hot and just wants to keep it going. Like, you cannot have single-digit shot attempts for that guy as often as they did, and the defense speaks for itself. So that's kind of where I start when I think of, like, what do the Suns need to be in order to fit Bud? It really kind of starts there for me.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. And I do think some of this will be impacted by who he decides to bring in as assistants. I think I would love to see Darvin Ham reunited with him. I think his experiences over the last 2 seasons now coaching the Los Angeles Lakers and the playoff experience and just the general just experience as a coach when you're coaching somebody like LeBron James, even Anthony Davis to a different extent, and just being the coach for the Los Angeles Lakers and the pressures that come with that on the season, on a daily basis, let alone a weekly and a season basis. I think it could be of great benefit to everything that they're looking to establish. He's a former player. And it's different when things are being critiqued and things are being said from someone that's a former player and that has a level of respect from a player's coach type of perspective. So I think he's somebody that can help with that. But looking at it specifically from the offensive lens, I do like your account for Bradley Beal with Drew Holiday. I think that Drew Holiday's paint touches and his just general efficiency and effectiveness on offense was so important for the Milwaukee Bucks. You can see in game 1 and game 2 of that final series when he wasn't quite who the player that he was the next 4 games in that series, they looked a little different. Chris Paul was taking it to him. Chris Paul was winning those matchups with Drew Holiday in the first 2 games, somewhat by leaps and bounds in multiple stretches in those 2 games as well. And then when things kind of neutralized and then went slightly to the Milwaukee Bucks' favor at that guard position, things look differently. And I think that's something that Bradley Beal can certainly sway. His drives, we both spoke on it all season. His drives were as important as anything else that he's bringing to this Phoenix Suns team. And again, like you said, if he goes 6 for 14, I'm perfectly fine with that if he's got 8 free throw attempts and he's got 15 plus drives tallied over the course of 48 minutes within all of that. That means he's operating the way that this team needs him to optimize not just himself, but the pieces around him. And I think that's something that Jrue Holiday had a back and forth with, even in that playoffs, let alone that final series. But it's clear the impact it had when he did play to the strengths that the team needed him to. And I also think the other big thing you talked about, playing through the post, a lot of things that the Bucks were doing, and speaking of organization in that last segment, were going through the middle third of the floor. So you putting Jrue Holiday on ball, or Chris Middleton on ball, or Giannis on ball, and then you got Jrue Holiday or whoever it is that doesn't have the ball, those other 2 players parked at the elbows, and then 2 players spaced super deep into the corners to keep the help away. And now you're playing in advantage basketball in space with those 3. They can set double screens for each other. They can flow into screen and the handoffs in the screens. They can go Spain pick and roll. There's just an endless, like you said, unpredictable amount of options and abundance there. And you just have to be able to press that button and get the most out of each other by going to it consistently. I think for Suns fans, if you want to kind of look at a specific example this season, we saw the Boston Celtics in that very first game when they played the Celtics 2 times within the span of 5 days after the All-Star break. That first game in Phoenix, the way that the Celtics really took it to the Suns' defense was they put their 3 best players on the court in action. At that time, it was Jrue Holiday, ironically, and then one of Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum and Derek White. And they went to their high splits, and they played with unpredictability, cutting off of each other and just moving the ball in that action, again, with 2 players flanked to the deep corners, playing in space. The Suns went to that same action maybe a week or so later against I think it was against the New Orleans Pelicans. They got positive results, but the issue with that is that was like the last time we saw it. Find something good, and then you see the process working, and you just don't go back to it. And I think that just speaks to kind of where this team was with the uneasiness and the level of the lack of organization, rather. I think that's something that Bud brings to the pot, and I think it's something this team will greatly benefit from.
Yeah, so that goes right into, I think, a concern about Bud that we don't have a time to spend a ton on, and I don't think you and I would consider ourselves experts on this guy anyway, so maybe it doesn't make sense to do it. But my general perspective on the adjustment side of things, which he gets hammered on, is I said it this way when he got hired. I think, to me, adjustments can win you a game, and that's important. You can steal a postseason game. You can do different things. Ty Lue's done it a million times. But habits, I think, are what win you a championship. So, yes, you can quibble with, okay, did he do this matchup right, or did he, run too much of the same kind of offense, or did he not focus on those marginal things like offensive rebounding enough when it would have helped? And those are all fair. But being able to come back to, this is who we are, this is what we do, this is what we run, especially after what we just saw with this past Suns season, you have to prioritize that over chasing this guy can come up with this, creative thing. And I think that's where assistants can come in too, more so than we maybe realize. But you talk about space and core actions with the best players, and I think, it kind of comes full circle back to Nurkic. Where does he fit into all of this? Because while he was important for the Suns when they were running their best stuff at their best, that does put the ball into the hands of one of your lesser players. And there were times in that playoff series where his lack of ability to, or willingness or confidence or whatever, to drive to the basket, be a threat as a scorer, and just confident and comfortable taking advantage of what Minnesota was giving, did hurt the Suns, right? You're seeing how much the ball movement and aggressive mentality that Denver has right now is able to beat that Minnesota defense in ways the Suns could not. So if he's not doing that, or he can't do that at the highest level, he's probably not really a spacer in the corner like you mentioned, Stephen. So where does that leave him? What do they want to look at? So I think in addition to a point-of-attack defender, which even if Beal plays his best Jrue Holiday impression all next season, I think they will need more options there. I think more options at center would help too. Maybe Nurkic is gone, maybe he's not, but either way, different types of people. You think the Bucks had Giannis as an option, Brook as their main option, and even Bobby Portis as an option. That's 3 very different kinds of guys that all did different things. I think the Suns will try to mimic that. The last thing I would say, though, is on the topic of Portis and Giannis, I think a premium for this offseason will be placed even more on size than it was. I think to me, if you're bringing Vogel in, you already should have been doing that, and they kind of missed when it came to that, but even more so now. Can they find enough of those pieces to go small? Can they find enough of those pieces to be maybe even more confident in their switching than they were under Vogel? Some of those things in order to keep the rim protection on that back line intact and not have to expose yourself, try to get the ball out of a guy's hands or force him into an uncomfortable position. Just trust your kind of, to use a Vogel term, your shell more. Switching can help that. So a little bit of a rabbit hole. We don't know what those guys will be. I hate to go into too much specifics on free agency targets so far out before we've heard any rumors of even who's available on options and guarantees and all that, but just to get people's minds kind of going in the right direction. But we are out of time. That'll wrap us up. Hit follow or subscribe to get another show to close out the week. Don't forget to read Stephen over at Bright Side of the Sun and PHNX, and follow him on Twitter if you're on YouTube. If you're on audio, his Twitter is in the show description or on the screen right in front of your face. And more to come throughout the offseason. The combine's heating up. We'll probably have some rumors and everything coming out of that as the draft nears. And, of course, this Coach Bud press conference whenever we eventually get there. I'll talk to you guys tomorrow.